L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup, ni dans une construction d'ensemble. Elle se fera par des réalisations concrètes, créant d'abord une solidarité de fait.
Einen wunderschönen guten Morgen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second day of our summit. After the two exciting and interesting discussions with young people we had yesterday on the topic of new enlargement as well, and the wonderful reception at the old residence here in Salzburg yesterday evening, today we have our opening session on the themes of how EU will cope with the current crisis and two other important panels as well that will be taking place. These will be on raw materials and energy, more autonomy for Europe, and Industry 4.0 and digitalization. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome you all. And if I could, I would very much like to welcome you all in person, everyone individually. There's so many friends here, men and women from all over Europe, and I'm especially pleased, of course, to be able to welcome quite a few high-level guests here this morning, and I'd like to welcome them personally, and I hope that I can ask you to all give them a round of applause at the end of this introduction. Our loyal guest every year here is EU Commissioner Johannes Hahn. Thank you for coming and being with us. This applause, of course, is ultimately for your important areas of responsibility within the Commission, the EU budget and administration. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you the Vice President of the European Parliament from Germany. I welcome Ms. Nicola Beer. And I am especially pleased, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Northern Macedonia, Bojan Marichikj. He is the Deputy Prime Minister and responsible for European affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome, because of course she belongs here in Salzburg. I would like to welcome the Austrian Federal Minister Karoline Edtstadler, responsible for Europe and constitutional affairs. Then two ladies from Serbia are very welcome here at our event. Ms. Jovanka Atanokovic, State Secretary at the Ministry for Mines and Energy in Serbia. And I'm very pleased that the Slovenian State Secretary for EU Affairs, Marko Stučin, is here with us today. Welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, please forgive me if I'm not following the protocol, but I do what I can, and it's nice to welcome very special guests at the end, and therefore I'm very pleased to welcome my governor of the province of Salzburg, Mr. Wilfried Haslauer. Welcome, Wilfried. I would like to thank you, Wilfried, and Mayor Harald Preuner for the wonderful reception yesterday evening at the residence here in Salzburg. Wonderful evening, wonderful atmosphere, and we enjoyed it very much. Thank you, with great appreciation. And together with our governor of Salzburg, I would like to welcome numerous representatives of various regions of Europe, such as the President of the Parliament and Autonomous Province of Vojvodina in Serbia, Istvan Pastor, and the President of the Supreme Council of the Autonomous Republic of Adjaria, David Gabajce. I'm also extremely pleased that the second president of the Burgenländische Council is here with us today. Welcome. And it is especially important for me to welcome the representatives of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps here in our midst, to whom I express my sincere gratitude for the generous support they have always given us, because I must say that without the assistance and support of the Austrian and foreign diplomats here in Austria, we would not be able to do our job. And therefore, many thanks to all of you and a warm welcome. And I'd also like to warmly welcome the Secretary General of the Austrian Foreign Ministry, Mr. Peter Launsky-Tieffenthal. Welcome and thank you. My gratitude also goes to our moderator and the presenters of today, Ms. Waltraud Langer, Regional Director of ORF Salzburg, Mr. Richard Grasel, who is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Courier newspaper, and Mr. Werner Seiker from Pulse 4. And of course, I'd like to thank all of those who have agreed to take part in our panel discussions. You will all bring important and substantive impulses to our discussions, I'm sure. And that is a very important part of our day, because we want to be able to spend as much time as possible on these important issues. And therefore, I won't say anything more about the content of today's event. I'd just like to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen. But above all, let me welcome our young participants from the schools and University of Salzburg. And let me tell you who they are, who these institutions are, because I'm so pleased that so many pupils and students are here. They are coming despite the fact that they're on vacation, on autumn vacation at present. So the Handelsakademies 1 and 2, the Orchestra Academy, the Christian Doppler Gymnasium, the Herz-Jesu Gymnasium, and the Federal Gymnasium are just a few of the institutions represented here today by their students. Welcome. And I'd now just like to say once again how pleased I am to welcome you here again today. And I would like to wish you and all of us interesting and exciting discussions. And I'll now give our Governor, Wilfried Haslauer, the floor to welcome you all. Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Vice President, distinguished, honored guests from the various political functions and areas, and our Salzburger minister is an especially important guest to us. Dear pupils, dear students, I'm so pleased that such important schools from Salzburg are represented here today with their principals, and since I once attended the academic gymnasium, I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you very much for carrying out for the 19th time this Salzburg Europe Summit here in Salzburg in difficult times into which we would rather not have slid, where it's about peace, raw materials, energy, all things that we thought we could take for granted and which are now, as we realize, things we can no longer take for granted. And a conference like this one, ladies and gentlemen, has to take place here in Salzburg. And why is that? Because Salzburg is a European state, country, was always this. Because of our history, we're a north-south link. We are characterized by artists, by sculptors, by painters, by musicians. Our music has become international European music. And Salzburg also stands for subsidiarity of our regions, because Europe does not draw its strength from its institutions, but rather from the people in our regions. And it's important to emphasize that time and again. And the Institute of the Regions of Europe does excellent work in order to achieve this goal. And for that, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude. Now, of course, peace, expectations, reality, visions is at the center of our discussions. People have very different opinions on this in Europe and in Brussels. Many are very skeptical. The European Union has risen to the challenge in many ways in recent times, and there have always been crises in the European Union. I mean, when you have 27 member states, obviously there's always going to be someone who disagrees. It's a characteristic of the European Union that it has to be able to manage crises. And to discuss this, of course, is therefore very important. And I'm so pleased that yesterday you already had such an extensive youth discussion. Recently, I was given a youth study from Austria. 7 to 19-year-olds were asked whether or not they were satisfied or unsatisfied, and 45% of young people said they are not satisfied with their health. I find that incredible. Obviously, I'm no longer 19, as you can probably see, and that I might not be pleased with my health is one thing, but 45% of young people, 39% are skeptical about their professional outlook in a situation of full employment, absolute full employment. 3.1% in Salzburg, and it's something like 2.3 from a European perspective. 16% are not satisfied with their financial situation, but that, I would say, is always the case for the whole population. And 29% are not pleased with politicians, which should make us think about our own work, obviously. But then now two figures which are shocking, I think. 7% are at risk of suicide, and 54% do not want to have children, and 60% of young women specifically don't want to have children. In one of the richest countries in which life is most worth living in the whole world, so many young people do not want to have children. What have we done wrong? I ask. Have we protected them too much? Have we neglected them too much because we had too much to do with our own issues? And you'll probably say, what in the world does this have to do with a European summit? Well, it has everything to do with it, because if our young people don't support our idea of Europe, of peace, of internationalism, of endless possibilities that we did not have when I was a child and a young man, then our model has failed. There's no two ways about it. And therefore, thank you very much for these discussions, because this contact to young people is what we need, and our committed educators and teachers are here with us today, and I think that is very important indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, our European model, which we are so convinced is the right one, which is built on human rights and democracy and the rule of law, globally, I'm sorry, it's a minority model, and it is not seen as we think it should be, as what everyone aspires to, what everyone wishes to have. But on the contrary, there are places in which people are willing to go to war against it. They're fanatically against it. And therefore, we need to enter into dialogue, because if we don't have a dialogue, if we don't remember time and again how lucky we are to have this model and to have been able to bring it to life, and which we must renew and work for and revive continuously, then we will lose it. And therefore, part of our work has to be talking about it, discussing it, allowing for different opinions and points of view, and to have a place where this diversity in Europe can be brought to life and discussed. And that's what we have here in Salzburg. And I would like to express my gratitude for it and welcome you to this event here today.
Ja, einen wunderschönen Vormittag von mir auch, meine Damen und Herren.
Well, we wish you a very good morning. My name is Richard Kausel, and I am the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Courier newspaper. We are an Austrian daily which was founded on the 27th of August 1944 by the occupation forces after World War II here in Austria. So thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. We have a very lively program up to lunchtime, and I am your moderator for the first panel, and many things were discussed as to who would be able to come here to this summit in Salzburg. Karl Nehammer was invited. He was going to come, but not surprisingly, with all of the crisis going on, he is not able to attend in person after all. And a few days ago, we were able to record an interview with him in Vienna, which took place a week ago in Vienna. Well, Mr. Nehammer, the various perspectives which have come into play are very important. For example, the migration crisis. Here it hasn't been possible to find a solution for many years. And what about the crisis with respect to Russia and so forth? So what is Europe really thinking? Let me just say first that Franz Schausberger has been organizing the Salzburg Europe Summit for many years now, and this is the 18th time, and it's a very important event. Let me just also say that in the face of the Russian invasion, it was the first time in many years that we were unified in our reaction in Brussels, because what happened there was a break with our history and our tradition. The fact that a sovereign state was invaded is something that we will not tolerate. Well, will it be possible to overcome this crisis, or will there be a natural solution? Well, there are often many crises, but I think that in the case of this war, it was very clear that politics cannot be led with weapons, and that we will not stand for it. And therefore, in this case, it's very important to see which sanctions are still efficient. How will we be able to deal with the situation in the future? And of course, we now need to say clearly who started the war, and that is the Russian Federation. What has not worked well is the solution for the migration policy, which I mentioned right at the beginning. We still don't have a European solution for this. What are you expecting from the European Union now after the migration wave becoming strong again over the past few weeks? Well, first of all, it's a shame that the Commission just looked on for such a long time. For a long time, the migration pressure was very strong. At the time when this started, I was Minister of the Interior. solutions were put forward, which, however, were not implemented because we were always looking at what divides our states and not brings us together, what unifies us. And what we need is better protection of our external borders and return procedures for illegal migrants. So we know that Austria is a landlocked country. It has an enormous number of asylum applications, and there doesn't seem to be any real reason for this if we have good external border protection and we're a landlocked country. Why do we have so many migrants here? Another important issue is energy policy. Winter is on the way, winter is coming, and the high gas prices are a very virulent question. And what do you think is going to be happening in our energy policy? Well, obviously, we've been able to do more than was thought in Austria. We now have a level of 85% filling of our gas containers, and 80% is what we had to have. And for Austria means that we had a dependency of 80%, which we were able to reduce to 50%. 50% is still a high dependency, but nevertheless, it shows that on the international gas market, a lot is moving, and that committed action, as we showed on part of the Austrian government, can allow us to find new sources of gas. And of course, the European Union also now has a decisive role to play. And if we buy together, therefore, if we purchase together, then the price will be less high for all of us. And having this less expensive gas will allow us to make it available to electricity producers in order to then produce cheaper electricity. And I can't do that on a national level because of the stock market. It has to be done on a European level.
Vertreter der Regierung aus Nordmazedonien.
We will be having also a representative of North Macedonia, and so there is a lot of pressure as to the enlargement also which might come to a halt. Is this your impression as well? And what's the role of the Austrian federal government? First, a big thank you. Thank you in particular to North Macedonia. They have done everything in order to make negotiations for enlargement possible and accession, so recognition and respect for the political elite and the responsible people in North Macedonia. And on the other hand, Austria still are building bridges for the Western Balkans region, which is so important. In the Western Balkan region, Austria has prepared the way, and we have also fought for candidate status for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Commission now have announced that actually there is candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina. These are important signals, and the process is ongoing. We are having 27 member states, so 27 vested interest, so we shouldn't be overly naive. It will definitely also be a moment where the Western Balkans has to see that Austria always is very much interested to invest in the region. Austria is one of the biggest investors in the region, and that in particular we have to show what we have in common. In 10 years from now, what will be our European Union? Will there be a rapprochement? Will there be a rift? Will Europe drift apart? And what is necessary for rapprochement? I think it will be decisive that Commission show over and over again that they know how to solve problems. Commission has to show that they find important how the 27 individual member states fare, because a general opinion discarding individual problems makes no sense, because this would mean even more pressure in internal policies. We see that in the field of migration, we see it in the field of energy. We have to have competence to solve issues, and we have to subscribe clearly to Europe being a project for the future, the European Union being the most important peace project ever. And many say, well, this has been said too often already, but in the very time of wars, it's such a privilege to live in peace, and this is safeguarded and guaranteed by the European Union. So it hinges on Commission and Parliament to work together constructively. It will never be simple, and we should not raise any hopes which can never be fulfilled. There are so many different interests. This will always be complex, and all kinds of compromise backed by 27 is indeed a huge success. Dear Chancellor, thank you very much for this interview for the 18th Salzburg Europe Summit. Yes, that much on the competence of Europe. This interview was made 1 week ago. In the meantime, there has been the Energy Summit of the heads of states and governments, and even if France and Germany have diverging opinions, you see that at the end, at least, there is a certain little gas ceiling, a mini ceiling, if you will. So there were critical views also as to the integration policy coming from Karl Nehammer, the federal chancellor, and we will certainly come back to this. Ladies and gentlemen, crises, multiple crises, cost a lot of money, and one person is in charge of money within the European Commission. That's EU Commissioner for Budget and Administration, Johannes Hahn. Over to you for your keynote, please.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much indeed. Governor, ministers, dear participants to this 18th edition of the Conference on the Regions of Europe, the Salzburg Europe Summit, and particular thanks to the young participants. Some maybe were not even born when the first event of this series was held here in Salzburg. This shows how much continuity there is. The title for my speech more or less has been chosen as follows: Will the Union master these crises? A short answer: together, yes. Alone, no. But this would not be a keynote, it would only be a key sentence, so I'll try to elaborate a bit on this statement. And I think it has come out also from the interview with the Federal Chancellor. It is important to understand that we all are the Union. So to say the Union has to solve something is not right, because we are the Union. And the Union is not only the European Commission in Brussels, but the European Union is, for instance, the European Parliament, is the heads of states and governments. And I don't want to enter into a migration debate here, but there is no solution so far in the migration question, and that's obvious, and you can exemplify this by many records and minutes of meetings on ministerial level and European Council meetings. You see that the member states could not agree to one solution, but possibly we as Commission have not yet made a perfect proposal, because a perfect proposal is always when we get criticism from 27. 27 would never applaud us and say bravo, this would never happen. But if we have equally shared criticism, then obviously we have a well-balanced proposal. So most probably for both still some improvement is possible. But let me explain briefly why I'm convinced that only together can we master the crisis. Let's start from blunt figures and facts. In the meantime, 5% of the world population is us. In 1900 that was 25%. And this proportion will decrease even further. The proportion of Europe as to the world economic power, which now is at 20%, will also decrease further, not because we perform so poorly, but because the emerging markets are catching up, and the total of the cake is 100, and if others get more, then it's obvious that our part is shrinking. But we still are in a position to cover 50% and finance 50% of the global social benefits. And here again, I hope that our proportion will decrease, not because we pay less, but because others, in the interest of their respective citizens, can maybe cover more. That much on the figure. So this means that the value and standing of Europe worldwide will decrease due to external circumstances, and we have to reflect on this and see what we can do in order to make sure that our role, our leading role in the world will be maintained. In the last few years or decades, we've witnessed several developments which bring out very clearly how important it is that Europe subscribes to and understands its own role, and that it's clear, and to speak with Charles de Gaulle, who once said, countries have no friends, countries only have interests. And this must also be said for a political bloc like the European Union. And if you just remember, we had an American presidency under Donald Trump, America First, where it has come out quite clearly what the interests of the US were, and Europe was not necessarily number one in those intentions. And the appraisal of many was that being a friend of Europe has its merits. And Trump was a bit outspoken, we can say, but the American politics also didn't change massively and hadn't been different before that. And I'm not even criticizing it, I'm only trying to bring out that the American vested interest in some areas is completely different from Europe. This does not change anything to the fact that, globally speaking, the US still is our most important ally. In the last 2 years, we have been witnessing an interesting development in China, now particularly manifested by the People's Congress and the role of Xi, who follows Mao Zedong's tradition and has eternalized himself, so to speak, as a leader. It was not an election, it was rather an announcement, so to speak. And the foreign policy of China has become much more aggressive in the wake of this. And this, I believe, shows clearly that China does not only show economic global commitment, but also societal one. And it is important to understand that here there is a societal rival, and the governor has rightly said that our model, our democratic, liberal, economic model, internationally speaking, is a minority program, if you will. And so one has to understand clearly and make sure that we maintain this, and that in terms of quantity we can also develop it further. We are having, a pandemic which still is not completely over, and in this very year, and this has been mentioned repeatedly and will also certainly be discussed here a bit further, we had or are having war in Ukraine started by Russia, and only Russia, only Putin is responsible for that. This should be repeated as often as possible, because around the globe there are some countries following and believing and trusting the Russian narrative, according to which us, the Europeans, have caused our own food safety programs because we have used sanctions. Those sanctions were necessary as a reaction to an aggression jeopardizing the territorial integrity of a country. And if you once accept this, then you would necessarily also accept future such aggressions. And so it is so important that from the very beginning we bring out things clearly, be outspoken, and show clearly that we help our Ukrainian friends wherever that is possible. And I'm so convinced that at short notice there will also be a unanimous decision to the tune that for next year we will support Ukraine financially even further, so that that country can also financially and economically survive during this state of war. I think that the reactions shown by Europe during the pandemic and also in today's energy crisis show clearly that working together and acting shoulder to shoulder is the only possibility of actually mastering things at the end. No question, here we are paying a high price. If we, for instance, think of energy and gas prices, this necessarily means social tension. It necessarily also means that there is more or less a revival in terms of nationalism. Here again, it has to be clear that the very opposite solution would be provoked by this when compared to what is necessary and desirable, because only together are we strong. One of our founding fathers, the then Belgian Foreign Minister Henri Spaak, more than 60 years, said very clearly, all European states are small, but some do not yet know. And this holds true even more now than 60 years ago. So we have to react to these challenges and together. And if, for instance, this is about the economic area, this is the most important area, and is also the quintessence of intensive discussion. It means to secure the European internal market, because our key asset is the European internal market, is the fact that Europe, even after the Brexit with more than 450 million citizens, is by far the most attractive market worldwide. And this is also the political lever which we have and could use in international negotiations and discussions, meaning that others also want to conquer this market, whereas we, with our companies, our possibilities, our opportunities, also act in other countries and on other levels. And this is why the reaction of China to call Germany for more openness, well, I mean, here I could only smile a bit, because what we call China to do is working reciprocity, and I do not see that China would show such economic openness which they want to see from us, and which they have also enjoyed in the past. And by the way, this is exactly what we cannot accept like this in the future, and this is why I fully agree to the reflections which, for instance, are made in connection with Hamburg Harbor or Hamburg Port by some important responsible people in Germany. I think from a certain moment on we have to bring out clearly where our strategic interests are. And by the way, one of those experiences from COVID is the very topic of strategic autonomy. But it would be fallacious to believe that strategic autonomy means that everything in the future will be produced in Europe. This is an illusion, this is treacherous. But what we should have learned, and I'm quite positive here, is that as regards our supply, our suppliers and our customers, we should diversify as much as possible. It isn't possible everywhere. One of the points of discussion also is critical raw materials, but there again there are possible alternatives. Let's do what we are doing, invest into research and development in order to develop alternative technologies, develop materials which can be used for substitution. And another topic where Commission will soon come up with proposal, that's the circular economy. If we are in a position to recycle much better than is the case nowadays, we can afford a host of imports of raw materials, or we can even save them, and so our political autonomy will be stepped up again. Just one figure, we are 450, with the UK more than 500 million inhabitants, and per year some 100 million of mobile phones are just discarded, are thrown away. But we still are not in a position to recycle those 100 million in such a way that we actually generate value added from this. So these are things we have to tackle in order to also intensify our neighborhood policy. Either we import stability or we import instability, and this is why I'm so grateful that the Austrian federal government very clearly are having a focus in terms of the Western Balkans region. It is indispensable that there is a rapprochement. It's difficult, we know that, but it has to come, and neighborhood in the east and to the south, here the focus very clearly is a necessity that's in our very own interest. And then eventually we must not forget, given all the difficulties we are facing today, that we also have to deal with our international role. We cannot say that globally speaking we are everybody's darling. No, definitely not. Because in the last few years we were highly successful, because as regards gas from Russia we could import from elsewhere at high prices, but only because we had the financial power to buy gas earlier than others needing it as well. And my colleague Borrell gets very many phone calls from foreign ministers of other countries where they tell him, you take away the energy we need as well, but we can't afford those prices. So we do have an issue here, and we can enjoy reputation which we will protect. Obviously, it has always been obvious that our own energy supply has to be secured. This will also be our future, but we have to know which side effects result from this. Or maybe the question of food safety in Africa. So Ukraine is key, Ukraine is very important and indispensable, that is clear, but we must not forget some other partners and other friends either. Quite to the contrary, it is necessary that we lay emphasis, for instance, on Africa, as we have always doing. We should even strengthen that. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, one could speak very, very long about this topic, but this is not the idea of this meeting. So let me repeat, together we will make it. I'm positive that in spite of all ups and downs, that within the European Union we will always live in a rational way, and that we will always protect our future. And on a positive note, I'm convinced that we are going through a valley of tears, if you will, a difficult period. It will certainly be difficult for all of us still, but at the end of the day, I'm fully convinced that Europe will be in a better position even than today, because we are now obliged to invest into renewable energies. We are obliged to diversify. We are obliged to also defend our role internationally, including, just in brackets, expenditure and organization of defense. So in total, these crises oblige us to be better positioned even, and I'm fully convinced that we will make it, we will succeed, and at the end of the day we will be in much better a position even than today, which is so important. And this is why I believe that here we can maybe quote one of the founders of the Salzburg Festival, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, who once said, a difficult era is like a dark gate. If you go through it, you will be stronger afterwards. Thank you indeed.
Dankeschön, Johannes Hahn.
Thank you very much, Johannes Hahn. you are EU Commissioner for the third time already, so one of the most experienced commissioners. And if Ursula von der Leyen at the beginning of the new term of the Commission said the Green Deal is most important, and for that a trillion it was of euro was earmarked. This is only the beginning. There will certainly be even more, and Johannes Hahn also makes sure that there is enough finance within the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now the Lady Minister Karoline Edtstadler, Federal Minister for EU and Constitution. And ladies and gentlemen, let me also tell you that the Salzburg Summit is not just a forum of lectures, it's a forum of dialogue, and here in the middle we have two microphones, so if you then have questions in English, German or Croatian, please do address them to the minister or to the other panelists, and I will ask you repeatedly, and the many young people being here, please just come down here. It's just a few steps, and you can of course always use the microphones and ask your questions. Dear Minister, a cordial welcome to Salzburg. I'm from Lower Austria, you are from Salzburg. So maybe I'm exaggerating, but still a very topical question. Viktor Orban, well known also here in Austria, yesterday in Hungary, in a speech said the sanctions of the European Union, as a matter of fact, are an attack upon Hungary, because Hungary is suffering from that. What is your reaction to this? He speaks about coal and energy prices. I will reply immediately, but as a Salzburger, let me also say Grüß Gott, welcome. It's so nice to wake up in Salzburg, particularly when it's raining, and it's even nicer to have a crowded room here and so many students. I know that some of you will go to Brussels, which I support personally, which makes me very happy, because only if you see and live and feel Europe and see the institutions, you get an idea of how Europe works. And now back to your question as to Viktor Orban. Let me usher this in by saying that I have been following European policy and politics for quite a while, and I've never seen such a strong unity and harmony. And this also is not a problem if individual states, of course, also defend their national vested interests, speak about them, and also use their influence. What you are mentioning in terms of Hungary and in terms of sanctions is of course something which we cannot deny. Of course, the sanctions can and must be felt within the EU, are felt by each and every member state of the EU. But what we must never do is to fall into the trap of the Russian narrative telling that the sanctions hit us more than Russia. This is completely wrong. This is propaganda. And we know that the sanctions take effect. They do take effect in Russia because the economy is collapsing there. Whole industries are collapsing, and we can also say very clearly that there is no supply, and this also goes for aviation, for instance. And what we do need now is not only unity within the European Union, but also perseverance. And Johannes Hahn has said it, the Valley of Tears. I said such a thing in Berlin a few weeks ago, and I've been criticized very much. How can I say so? I do believe that it will be hard times. It means that we have also shown that many things should also be used. Are there any calculations? The global affluence could go down by 10%. Of course, a bit different from region to region, but from your perspective, sanctions will be used. No discussion about this. No change whatsoever. Well, there is no alternative to sanctions, and I say it very clearly. What do we do if we see that a state just invades another state and that he wants to change borders? And I'm not speaking about the Russian society, I'm speaking about Putin. And what can we do? We must not do one thing. We cannot just not do anything, because this is a breach of international law. This is something which has never been before. And I also worked with the Council of Europe, with the European Court for Human Rights. This is a breach of international law, and we have to react, and we should never look into the mirrors. If them in the books of history it would say we have accepted it. No, we won't accept it, we won't tolerate it. It is hard, it is difficult. Sanctions can be felt, and of course energy prices and everything has been affected by this. But here again we have to say that we are obliged to react, and a lot has happened. And what is happening also in diversification of energy sources obviously is evidence of the fact that Europe can adapt, that we are in a position to find solutions in order to also sail through this crisis, and then eventually, sooner or later, we will be even stronger. Now, Karl Nehammer has also said that there are crises within the European Union, like the crisis of migration, where we rather drifted apart. There were different blocks. Then COVID is also an example. Vaccines, common purchase of vaccines. So how is it now in the ministerial councils of the EU? How are the bilateral talks? Can we maybe have a short view into this? Do they now say we have to work together even more closely, or is it rather different? Well, Karl Nehammer has said it, it's never easy. And a European solution, that means tough negotiations. This means that we have to negotiate clearly, and we have to understand the roles of others. Don't judge someone in whose shoes you didn't walk is the name of the game here. So we have to understand others and find a solution. And you've said during COVID there was a rapprochement. Yes, indeed, of course, we are inclined to also maybe glorify things in a retrospective. It was difficult then as well. And I remember the first few months when I walked up and down in my office the first days after the lockdown and made phone calls to so many neighboring states of Austria, so that at least for those the borders will remain open who are commuters. You remember so many health staff comes from Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and they then could not cross the borders any longer, because when they would have gone back they would have to go in quarantine. This may be an area where they have to pay at an income which starts makes it not possible.
So things weren't easy during the pandemic either, but we managed to find solutions. And a few months ago I said, well, the pandemic was really our warm-up crisis, and many have criticized this. How can you say this? The pandemic was horrible. Yes, that's true. We're still quite over it, but of course it's easier to buy masks together, or disinfectant, for example, or to buy vaccines together. It's easier to buy those things together than energy. And I think we learned a couple of lessons here. We really learned that there's certain areas in which we can only act together. And now let me say the following. We can only be successful together. Now, last week the European Council took place in Brussels, and we prepared the summit during the General Affairs Council in Luxembourg. And one thing became quite clear during this meeting, as several member states had to finance very costly measures in order to help their citizens. And now we're really hitting a certain limit. The next steps are steps that we have to take together. We're purchasing energy together. A common solution as far as the merit order system is concerned. We can't have the highest prices dictate the market. And we are continuing to negotiate. And I can say the European Union can act speedily. On Tuesday we prepared this summit, Thursday, Friday summit took place, and now this week we have the Energy Council that will discuss these things as well. Now, Europe can act speedily. This leads me to my last question, or two of my last questions. Who is really the engine in Europe at the moment? We know the big member states, France and Germany, they're not seeing eye to eye at the moment. Now the French delegation cancelled the usual meeting for the Council of Ministers because they said we disagree on so many topics that we don't really know what to talk about. Italy has a new government and we don't know how its European affairs policy will look. We don't have the UK anymore. Now, who's leading the EU, or does this really mean that the Commission has been strengthened? That the institutions in Brussels have been strengthened? Now, I'm tempted to say change isn't always bad. Of course, many things have changed since Brexit. And the powerful three, France, Germany and the UK, don't exist anymore, and the relations between France and Germany have changed as well. But we've seen this for two and a half years now, ever since we negotiated the multi-annual framework. Other alliances can also strengthen the EU. You may remember the Frugal Four. Austria was a part of those. And we stood up for clear rules when it comes to managing the EU budget, 450 million euros for the next generation funds. We really need clear rules on how to use that money. 4 member states advocated for this, and we prevailed. And alliances are being formed depending on what topic we're talking about. Energy alliances with member states that are interested. Hungary and Croatia, Belgium and the Netherlands have similar interests as far as this is concerned. And let me say the following. Now, this is something that may not directly relate to the EU, but this is also an obligation that we have. We have to consider the infringement of human rights. Mahsa Amini died a horrible death in Iran a few weeks ago, and we wrote a letter. I have now garnered the support of 13 member states. Vice President Baer signed immediately as well, because if human rights are disregarded, if women are being tortured to death because they're not covering their heads, then we have to act. This is an alliance that we're currently forming as well, so we no longer can rely on fixed alliances. We have to rely on situational alliances. But doesn't this make things more difficult? We have the Visegrad states, we have Austria, Germany, but doesn't that make it more difficult to lead the European Union? Well, I think you have to take a closer look. You maybe need more negotiation rounds, and you have to prepare the rounds maybe better, but this really strengthens the process of democracy, I think. And we don't have 27 different opinions around the table. Usually we have groups that form. And let me pose another question with a view to enlargement. This will be interesting to, I guess, from North Macedonia. Now, we're currently facing crises. Doesn't that mean we have to solve our internal problems first before we become 31 or 32 member states? Well, enlargement really isn't a question of speed, but a question of credibility. And the European Union has really lost a lot of credibility in this regard, because for many years we haven't kept our promises. And let me say this very clearly. I've also said this very clearly to Ukraine. There is no fast-track procedure for enlargement, for accession. There are no shortcuts. These reforms that sometimes are painful and substantial, they have to be made, and we want to support the countries in this, and this is something I try to stress time and again. We have garnered a lot of experience in Austria when it comes to best practice models, when it comes to supporting partnerships to fight democracy, fight corruption, strengthen democracy, and we will continue to act in this direction. And if we can assure the Western Balkans, which are important to me, that we take this seriously and that we want to support them, then certain certain states will be able to accede quite quickly. Others will need a bit more time, and then there are others that have recently only reached candidate status, such as Ukraine or Moldova. For these countries, it'll take a bit longer because they first have to take the necessary step, and they really have to change things on a fundamental level first. Karoline Edtstadler, our Federal Minister for EU and the Constitution of Austria. No, you have a very tight agenda. But, ladies and gentlemen from the audience, do you maybe have any questions to our ministers? The gentleman, if you would step up to the microphone, I think we have time for this one question. My question is the following. The unanimity rule, when will it be changed? We always need a consensus in order to reach a decision, but we need to reform this. We need to revert to a majority decision-making process. Yes, I think this is one of the most frequently asked questions, if I can put it that way. And this is really an important question. If the EU wants to become bigger, then we have to think about how our systems can work in the future. And I like to state things quite clearly in this regard. We have to think about whether the unanimity principle could maybe be changed just to make sure that we can take faster decisions in certain areas. Let me give you an example. Sanctions will only be agreed on in a consensus in the future, because this really shows how united the EU is. But when it comes also when it comes to the enlargement, we will continue to need unanimity, because if someone wants to join the club, this will only be possible if everyone else agrees. And this meant that things took a bit longer for Albania and North Macedonia, because there were issues to be resolved between one member state and North Macedonia in this case. And I think there are other areas in the area of international cooperation where we could move to a majority-based system in order to speed up the decision-making process. And this would then mean that there maybe are some member states that don't agree on everything that's part of a given resolution, but we could still rely on that system. Thank you very much for this question. Just imagine that there was a consensus system in Austria. That would make governing the country much more difficult. So a reformed system could maybe make sense. And Johannes Hahn used to be our Minister for Sciences, and we have the former Health Minister with us today, and they also were able to do things without having to rely on a consensus. Thank you very much to our Minister.
Und damit darf ich meine
Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with our first panel. I'm happy to welcome the participants of this panel. Welcome to Nicola, the Vice President of the European Parliament.
Ich begrüße
welcome the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of North Macedonia, responsible for EU affairs. And then from Austria, Peter Launsky-Tieffenthal from the Foreign Office.
Ich freue mich, dass Marko Stutzin
And Marko Stutzin is with us today, State Secretary for EU Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia.
und ich begrüße
And remotely via Skype, let me welcome the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Liliana Pavlova.
Ms. Pavlova, I think the flight was cancelled to Vienna or to Salzburg. Where are you now?
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, my flight was cancelled and I couldn't And I couldn't come in person, for which I'm really very, very sorry, but thank you for the opportunity at least to join you virtually.
Dankeschön. Ich hoffe, man hat es auch verstanden jetzt im Saal.
I hope you were able to hear her in the room. Unfortunately, her flight was cancelled, but she is with us remotely. Now, I can tell you that we will also have a remote guest to Kiev. Olga Stefanishyna will be joining us via Skype, the Deputy Prime Minister for EU integration. And we have a very limited time for her intervention, because right now in Kiev you can't just sit down at a computer anytime and Skype with a Western country. As soon as we have her on the screen, we will interrupt our panel discussion and talk to the Deputy Prime Minister from Kiev. Ladies and gentlemen, we have many young participants, and I don't want everyone to walk away depressed today, because our topic are the EU crises. But I would like to give each participant 1 minute. Ms. Beer, if we could start with you, what do you think is great about Europe? Just 1 minute, please. We're really breathing life into the principle of diversity and unity. And we have a great political system with an embedded auto-correctional mechanism. We don't rely on aggression and violence. We have the rule of law, and we have a system that is built on a dialogue, innovation, and the rule of law. And I think this is really what convinces people, and I think this is something that we have to stress more worldwide. Prime Minister Marichikj, what do you like Europe?
Well, 1 minute, the short version?
Only 1 minute.
Okay, I just have to say it's a great pleasure to be in this panel with these speakers. Why we would like to join the EU? Because I think it's still the best option for our country, and I think it is still the best peace, political and economic project for the whole continent. So we have no better option. It's still a peace project, otherwise we wouldn't ask a question, should Ukraine be part of the European Union? Western Balkans was also used to be a turbulent region, and once we get into the European Union, we will close the topic of our prosperity, security and stability, and we will open the topic of a fight for providing for a constant level of values of democracy, rule of law, fight against corruption, things that are troubling our region for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I think that, but the most important thing is the trust in the European Union in our region. 15 years ago, in North Macedonia, we had 85% of level of support for the membership. Today it's 65. So in 15 years, 20% of drop. But among those 65, if you ask the question, when do you think North Macedonia will join the EU, 28% would say never, and 27% would say I don't know. So half of them don't believe that we are actually going to join at any point. So regaining the trust in our European future with a tangible plan for joining the European Union, in our opinion and with our position, not later than 2030, is crucial to save the region from mass migration of the young people.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It wasn't a minute.
No, it wasn't.
But a little bit longer, but that's fine. Frau Pavlova,
Ms. Pavlova, Luxembourg, Sofia, what do you like about the European Union today?
Das funktioniert jetzt gerade.
Unfortunately, we're experiencing a technical issue here.
Okay, Frau Pavlova.
Ms. Pavlova.
A moment. That's an American product. It's Microsoft. It's Microsoft Skype. Okay, wir bleiben hier in Europa.
We're staying in Europe. Peter Launsky-Tieffenthal. I think the question you asked, what do we like about Europe today? Well, what I'm most happy about is the fact that many young people are showing their interest in Europe today because they're here today. They're interested in our model, our way of life, which we are defending at the moment. We have the war of aggression that Russia has started, but we also have other systemic rivals, and we are trying to make sure that we hand down a Europe to the next generation in which all the values that are important to us still persist. Now we will try again to talk to Ms. Pavlova.
Just in a minute, what you like very much on Europe? Okay, es dürfte vor einer Minute noch gegangen sein.
Okay.
But now it don't. We have another try because we have one more member here at our board. Herr Minister Stutzin, was?
Minister Stutzing, what do you like about Europe? Yes, I do speak German because I will speak English because it's a bit easier for me today. But first, thank you very much for your invitation.
What I like in Europe right now, that it proved this misconception that it functions slow. The European Union is not functioning slow. Through many crises that we went in the last couple of years, we actually are seeing that we are able to react, and we are able to react fast. And last week we saw that we were able to react fast to the crisis that was even a couple of weeks or months ago unimaginable to solve. And now we are seeing so many, 27 states and the Commission bringing the solutions on the table that will actually work. This is what I really like from the European Union. There's one more thing I would like to mention. The Western Balkans and the enlargement process was, so to say, forgotten in many Western countries. And what I like is that now everybody is seeing we should not forget about the region. The region is of utmost importance for us, for security and other reasons. And what I like is that we are going there now and that we are doing the steps that are right to do at the moment.
Ich möchte vielleicht...
Now, let me revert to a question that we also asked Johannes, Hahn, Karl, Nehammer and Karoline Edtstadler. We're really experiencing a so-called polycrisis at the moment. Multiple crises, war, inflation, corona, nationalism, veto problem, competitiveness, energy, Brexit, accession, financial crisis, the climate crisis. So we really have a lot of work ahead of us. So a polycrisis means that we have multiple crises that are all interlinked. It's difficult to fight against inflation because we're also facing another crisis at the eastern border of the EU. And now does such a multiple polycrisis mean that Europe is experiencing more internal problems? Well, I think this really shows that we have not done our homework properly. We have waited too long. Now we're experiencing many different crises, and many of these issues are issues we've been discussing for 10 or 15 years. We've simply waited too long. And we haven't really taken up those issues during times when we didn't have so much else to do. Now this means we have to run twice as fast to get things done. And now we can't say, well, right now we're dealing with Ukraine. We can't deal with migration. No, this isn't true. We have to really start implementing reforms, external reforms and internal reforms, because otherwise things will just continue to pile up. Do you think this will work? Yes, I do believe this will work, because right now we're experiencing a tremendous amount of pressure, and colleagues have just said it. We've finally managed to speed things up. I'm a liberal politician. I will never understand this brinkmanship, why people wait until they're facing the abyss until they finally take action. And I think we also have to think long term now, because many of the questions that we're dealing with today, the issues that we're dealing with today, are important for the future. Let's talk about energy. We cannot just think about next winter. We have to really invest also in the long term. We need credible partners in order to import energy, and we need to produce our own energy and other raw materials, rare earths, for example. We need to look at new energy sources, nuclear fusion, for example. We really have also to think about long-term solutions. Peter Launsky, do you think we can heal from 15 diseases at the same time? If we think about the climate crisis right now, it's not really in the spotlight any longer because we're facing other issues. What do you think about this? Well, I think all these crises have shown how much we depend on each other. We're seeing the war in Ukraine, and this has really shown that we need each other every day when it comes to very simple questions. Open borders for commuters, for example. When it comes to caregivers for the elderly in our society, when it comes to agricultural workers, we all depend on each other in our daily lives. And I think we've learned one thing. We need to stand together to solve these issues. And I can support what the Vice President has just said. I believe that together we will be able to find solution. The Federal Minister just said it. Sometimes it may be painful, but it's not just the individual problems that matters, but it's our European way of life. Sometimes we hear critical voices, and the or as Deputy Prime Minister has said it, skepticism is on the rise, but at the same time, many others are willing to be part of this project. And maybe this is something we have to continuously remind ourselves of. We do really have the capacity to find solution, and yes, I believe in this. Okay, let's try the third time. Let's try to talk to the Vice President of the European Investment Bank.
Yes, I can. The problem was
yes,
that you couldn't hear me.
That's fine.
Apart from cancelled flights, apparently the signal was bad, but I hope you can hear me. So if I may very briefly answer your first question, just in 2 sentences, I strongly believe that we more than ever need Europe, stronger Europe, Europe which is flexible, decisive, pragmatic, reasonable, and fast to address the different crises. But the phenomenon which we see and which we observe recently is that EU policy is somehow equating to crisis policy. But European project should not be only about crisis. Of course, we need to learn our lessons in crisis and to become stronger. And I think COVID response was a real example that some lessons learned from previous crises were there, and we managed to react jointly, united, with a strong and bold response, I should say. But now to the question you asked, will we survive the crisis and how? Yes, I fully agree with Commissioner. The short answer is yes, but there are a lot of buts. We need to join efforts, to join forces. We should stop thinking what divides us. Otherwise, populism is rising, but really what unites us. And we need to to somehow to take advantage of our potential, because Europe has a great potential. We just need to focus on this and to concentrate our efforts, because we have single markets, but not for goods, not so well functioning for services. We need to strengthen it. We can have excellent digital economy infrastructure, but we need to invest more. Europe is an example of digital transformation, decarbonization, and this is exactly what we have in this energy crisis. We need it more than ever. Working on decarbonization, diversification, and new resources, mobilizing private investments. And this is what exactly the EU bank, the EU climate bank, what we can do and helping, mobilizing private investments, de-risking instruments, flexible instruments and financial instruments, so to the huge financial needs which needs to be addressed could be there in order in support of really the investment flows in Europe. Because Europe sometimes can be complicated, can be difficult, but I think we have to invest now in really boosting the investments, and I think we have the experience, the leverage, the EU bank, the EIB, and together with the private sector, together with the European Commission, and with, of course, with governments, to channel better the funding with the right instruments in place. And I'm optimistic here that whenever we are able to join forces, we will be able to overcome the crisis. Thank you.
Frau Pavlova, I want to ask a question, as long as the Skype still works. Die Europäische Investitionsbank
The European Investment Bank is not financed via the EU budget. The EIB uses the capital markets. What about the credit situation in Europe? We're experiencing an economic war. There are other competitive blocs that are against Europe. The US also. Energy costs in the US are lower, and this is why it's more competitive. Does Europe still have a AAA rating on the finance markets? Do we have enough cheap money for Europe for the investments you mentioned?
Well, the economic outlook is critical. Let's put it like this. But for example, we still have our AAA rating. That's why I said I believe that the EU bank is the answer in support of the governments, and also together with the European Commission to have the right instruments in place. Because indebtedness after the COVID pandemic is an issue, is still an issue. So. We can not only rely, of course, on loans, but combination, as we call it, blending of grants and loans, is the best answer to address the problem. Because, of course, we see energy prices remain at high levels. Volatility is still high. Governments are introducing specific measures. But still, the persistence of the energy shock will still hamper the economic growth in next year, and the projection of the growth is still low. So the government budgets are already under pressure. So combination of resources and then our funding, which is at the best rate, is something which we can offer in order to make sure that the burden on state budgets is a little bit reduced, if I may say so. And so instruments like Recovery and Resilience Facility and other are really those which could play a role in all efforts to introduce the right measures in support of firms, of companies, of economies, and of course of households.
Danke vielmals, thank you very much. Bojan Marichikj, das war.
Thank you very much. Where does that come from, Bojan Marichikj? When I went to school, we were talking about the biggest peace project in the whole world. That is what the European Union, or the European Community at the time, was called. Can the European Union do that? And of course, you have an insight into what the wish of your people is in North Macedonia. Does your people want peace or economic growth as a priority?
Dilemma. We want economic growth in peace and in democracy. I think that the EU credibility and the EU perspective is built up on the actions of the EU. I will give you an example of this year. I think the only way that the EU credibility can raise and that is particularly important for North Macedonia, because North Macedonia has always been a showcase for European diplomacy and for European action. I am very sorry that Commissioner Hahn left, because he is a great friend of my country and he has done a lot for the benefit of our country and for its development in difficult times. This year is a showcase as well for us. When the aggression in February started, the Russian aggression to Ukraine, we were one of the first to embrace the sanctions against Russia. We have dismissed 11 Russian diplomats, which is a lot for a country of 2 million people, and we have made a serious military assistance to Ukraine. But we were very vocal about getting the attention of the European Union to help us with the energy crisis, with the food supply, and with electricity supply. And last week, we got an information from the European Commission that there is a 1 billion euro of support for the region for energy crisis, and we were getting additional macro-financial assistance. This is the key of how to get the peace and economic growth at the same time with the brand of the European Union in the Western Balkans. Because we were always repeating, the most important thing is that EU is first to help of the Western Balkan countries, because if EU doesn't, then it will open door for third parties to show that EU doesn't work for the Western Balkans. And our goal, our target is to show that EU actually works for Western Balkans and that helps the Western Balkan countries. It was the same with the COVID crisis. And I think that it is possible to merge peace and economic growth, and the Western Balkan countries are the best case of it. Of course, those convinced Europeans and those pro-European governments that were strong in this crisis together with the EU.
Herr Schutzin, sehen Sie das auch so? Auch
Mr. Schutzin, do you have the same opinion? It hasn't been that long for you, since 1991, when there was still a war ongoing in your region. Is Europe still a big peace project for Slovenia? Is this still an issue in Slovenia? Well,
how the European countries would react to all this crisis if there were no European Union. And that's why, from this perspective, we are only members for since 20 years now, and I can't imagine being out, and that's why it's important for us, for Western Balkan countries, to also give this perspective, a real perspective, to join, because if we are seeing what's happening in Ukraine now, and how much this support of the Union means for the countries that are in troubles, I mean, it's of very big importance. And Slovenians really see this, because I have this experience from living before in the country before it was member of the European Union, and we really feel genuinely being part of a wider union that on one side helps you, but on the other side also lets you being influenced by your country. So we don't feel the exclusion in the way that even if we are a small country, we wouldn't have the say in the European Union. We have the say, and we can say what's important for us, and the European Union listens to us, and the other member states are listening to us, and that's really important. But if it's a peace project or not, maybe I would, I remember the famous article from Robert Kagan. It was written, I think, 20 years ago, where there was this thesis, Americans are from Mars and Europeans are from Venus, which would mean that the American politics and the foreign policy would base on this raw power, and the European foreign policy would base itself on this soft power. I don't know if we can afford this thinking nowadays, because the world has changed in the last 20 years, and there's this big, let's say, competition among big powers, and the question is if European Union can afford to be only soft powers in the next decades.
Ich möchte Ihnen eine Frage stellen.
I'd like to ask you a question which has to do not with your function that you have now, but the ones before that. And it's not that long ago, in 2016, that you were a member of the International Court of Criminal Justice in The Hague. And with respect to use of chemical weapons and so forth. So how do you see this war and what is happening there and the war crimes? Do you think people will be brought to The Hague and the court there?
I was involved in the work of the International Criminal Court and also of the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons. And I have a very strong hope that both those organizations, but not only those organizations, but there are others, the other international organizations, that they will do what they have to do in a situation like this. Because only if we believe in this multilateralism and international organizations and really help them as member states, then the world can actually, in my view, become a better place, because it's difficult to do it country or each individual country, but it's much easier if we are joined together in a project like for example, international organizations are. Asking the question of if I see how I see that the international courts will prosecute the what's happening in the Ukraine right now. Everything is there, so the mechanisms are there, and knowing the International Criminal Court very good from inside, I can say that it has a lot of very dedicated prosecutors and judges that will do everything that's possible to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for this view on this topic. Ich möchte jetzt
And now, before we go back to Kiev by video, perhaps we can look at the following issue of trade-off. The COVID crisis, the energy crisis, and the interest rate increases all mean that there will be an economic crisis. In Germany, there'll probably no economic growth next year, stagflation, and that might even lead to an economic downswing or even a depression. Now, at the same time, however, investments are necessary within the Green Deal, for instance, and they're really necessary in order to save our planet. And obviously, I think we all know that climate change is happening. It's become abundantly clear over the past year. So how much is it supposed to be? 5% of GDP that's supposed to be dedicated to saving the planet? And I mean, we'll need billions more in order to do something about climate-friendly energy. Mrs. Bear, what do you think about this? Well, yes, of course, we have to make sure that we invest in the right set of instruments. And it's very important to have a common energy market. That also means, however, that we do our research together and our development together. And we need to have an overview of the instruments that we're using. Are they all market-driven? Are they technologically open? And are we really going towards the best solution for the least, and the one that is least expensive, or is there too much bureaucracy involved in the end? What about our artisans, our small businesses, the families that have to be supported? We need more training opportunities for young people. There's so many things that need to be solved in the context of this issue. And it's very important that no euro is spent that is too much for this. But at the same time, we need to make sure that things are adjusted accordingly, but not in order to postpone the Green Deal. No, on the contrary, we need to make sure that renewable energy is relied on more. Yes, but during the COVID crisis, we did see that within 1 year it was possible to actually arrive at a fairly good vaccine. whereas other vaccines usually took about 10 to 15 years to develop in other cases. And shouldn't we say that saving our planet is at least as important as a vaccine against COVID? Well, yes, you're right. And we have to do more and accelerate more and keep going. We have a really good training and education level, and we have very good researchers. We're trying to attract more and more people in this field from other continents because it's a really good opportunity for them to work at our universities and research organizations, but we have to set up the framework that's necessary for that. For instance, look at nuclear fusion. We have been investing for 30 years now in ITER, which is a nuclear fusion form which hasn't really taken up to now. At the same time, we have all these startups all over Europe who need new frameworks in order to be able to work in this decentralized energy framework. And that means that we have to set up a framework which will make it possible for us to change the laws governing nuclear power production. And if we don't do it quickly enough, then the United States will overtake us, and that should make us think about what we will be doing in 5, 8, or maybe 10 years. We really need to become independent. Well, I don't want a domestic policy discussion here, says the moderator. No. I think that nuclear fusion is a very important topic, but at the same time, in 10 years, it's not going to be as important as now. Everyone wants to get away from nuclear fusion and invest in alternatives. And I'm sure that's true of Austria's as well. And the solutions, if we're not careful, will not be produced in Europe, and we'll have to pay a lot of money to import them from the United States and elsewhere. And I think it's very important for us to use our own creativity, our own researchers who are very good, and we can't let them go abroad all the time because the working conditions aren't good enough for them here in Europe. Well, I think this very energy-driven speech which you just came out with in favor of more European-based research is something that really spoke to our young people out there. Well, let me say something about a task that I used to fulfill within the United Nations with respect to the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. And one of those goals is specifically about climate, and then, of course, also about R&D and science. And what I was impressed by at the time was that many international companies said that it's not only for ethical reasons, but because it's a better business model for us that we're going in this direction and supporting these goals. And it's very important for us to take the economy on board, business people on board, and society on board, and then only then will it be possible to put all this into practice. Yes, but if I look back 10, 15, 20 years of European research policy and digitalization policy, there was none really. I mean, we go to Amazon.com and to Google.com and Airbnb. So that's all in the United States. And in Europe, nothing much has happened. We buy everything from over there. And even I think of Boeing and Airbus and the airline industry, we depend on the United States, and Google is a gatekeeper, and what they don't approve will not be better seen by us. Well, I think the crises have shown that we are in a threefold dependency. Security issues, there's the US, energy issues, Russia, and commerce, China. So these crises have taught us that we need to make an enormous effort in order to become more independent. And we just heard from the minister that we will never be 100% successful and 100% self-sufficient. But the crises have made us think a lot about what we could do. And we have a very good material commitment on behalf of the European Union for more independence and self-sufficiency in the future. And of course, we're very dependent on products and services that come from abroad. I mean, we just mentioned video conference technology, for example. We had various opportunities and chances at the beginning of the pandemic and made our choices there. And what we really need to do now, however, is move back in the direction of European technology. Perhaps, since I've just heard that we still don't have our connection to Kiev, so perhaps I could ask our audience if they have any questions already to our panel. Of course, we'd be very pleased if you have questions. And as we know, it usually takes one person to break the ice and come up with the first question. So please don't be shy, come forward. I can see lots of people looking at their cell phones. Don't be shy, ask a question. Well, I'll continue with Mr. Stucin then. What does Europe have to do in terms of R&D in order to solve these multiple problems? Is it true that we're still sleepyheads here in Europe, in a way?
The reality, because if we are aware that we are actually living a new reality, then we are going from this crisis mode to strategic planning mode, and this is, I think, important. So we are not just solving the crisis as they are, but really planning ahead, and this is something that European Union is maybe lacking for the last years. And but on the other side, I'm really seeing this starting to work. Last year we had a conference for the future of Europe, where we asked the citizens what they think, what they would propose for the European Union to function better. And we are really advocating to implement many of those proposals, because they're good and they can be done without changing the treaties or going into the big discussions about reshaping European Union. A lot of things is possible to do right now. And I'm sure that we are able to come together and see where do we like to see us in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, how we are going to be competitive in this world. And European Union is not a dinosaur that is sleeping somewhere. It's a very vibrant, it's a group of very vibrant economies. And as we are doing these homeworks at home, at every member state, a lot is done at the European Union level, and a lot can still be done. And I'm very positive that we are going into this thinking mode actually now.
Marichikj, Sie haben genickt ein wenig, als der Herr...
Well, you were just nodding as you listened to Mr. Stucin. Is this important for you in your process of becoming a candidate country?
Candidate country for 17 years now, and we've been waiting for a strategic thinking from the EU in the past years, and we are lucky and happy that we are finally there. We have started the accession negotiations in July this year together with Albania, and I think that from outside, or let's say from the neighborhood, even though we are surrounded by EU member states, so we are practically in the courtyard of the European Union, things at strategic level are much more clearer to us, maybe even for some of the member states. But I think that the solution is always more European Union, not less European Union, because throughout this crisis, and we are facing constant crisis, particularly in the past 15 years, more European Union has been always an answer. It is the same for us. I think that the enlargement policy has been, let's say, taboo in the past 10 years, in most of the time, after Croatia has acceded. But I think it's not anymore. I think that enlargement policy is an example how can EU be a global player again, even though on a small scale, but it also the transformative power of European Union can be best visible through the enlargement policy. So I think enlargement policy at strategic level is an opportunity for the European Union. It's not a challenge, but an opportunity. And I think the sooner we make a plan for our countries, for Western Balkan 6, for accession in the European Union, the better chance will have the European Union to show its strategy on a long run. And we are very glad that we have been invited to participate, at least as observers, in this Future of Europe conference. And we are very grateful for the European political community, which is another forum to share our views and to share our problems, but it's definitely not a substitute for our membership. So strategic thinking of EU is always good for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Ich glaube, da gibt es viele Unterstützer auch in.
Well, I think there are many supporters for this, for your position, that is, in the audience. Another issue that Karl Nehammer and Karoline Edtstadler mentioned is migration. It's a major issue here in Austria, and the minister has now decided to set up tents because the number of refugees coming to us has increased again. And here the criticism has been that not enough is being done by Europe. Do you still think that this issue can be solved? We've been talking about the migration crisis since 2015. Nothing has happened. The deal with Erdogan to keep or welcome refugees in Turkey and have the EU carry the cost has not really worked. And what can we do? I mean, at the same time, we're looking for people to work in many sectors of the Austrian economy. Well, you mentioned our federal chancellor and what he said this morning, and what he said, well, maybe not today, but at the interview that was recorded and on many other countries, that in principle, migration is a positive thing. And you mentioned the example that Europe depends very strongly on qualified professionals, that we need qualified people from all over the world to fill jobs that we can't fill ourselves here in Austria. So, in principle, it's a positive thing, but we need it to happen in an orderly fashion. And that is where the challenge lies, which you mentioned. As far as Austria is concerned, I think Austria has shown recently that, especially when we're talking about displaced persons from Ukraine, that the Austrian public, that the civil society and the federal government are very committed to making things work. And we want these displaced persons to find a home here in Austria, at least for the time being, that they can be integrated, that their children can go to school and to kindergarten here, and the ambassador of Ukraine is here with us, and at least on a weekly basis we have an exchange on what we can do together to alleviate the situation and to help people who are here in a very difficult time. At the same time, the migration figures are increasing. They're on the rise from India and Tunisia above all as well, and they come through the Western Balkan countries to Austria, and it's totally understandable that for economic reasons they're trying to reach Europe. And this is obviously proof of the fact that our model of living is very attractive way across our borders. But unfortunately, people who don't really have a chance to receive asylum here because the situation in their country may be economically difficult, but fortunately they're not being persecuted politically, and their situation is not as bad as in Syria or Afghanistan or other parts of the world, and therefore they cannot be accepted as asylum seekers here. And we hope that the day will come on which in the European Union it will be possible to also talk about investments in countries of origin of refugees, but not only that, also about how to put these people to work in our countries, because we need qualified professionals. Well, thank you for that. Here in Austria, at the latest since Sebastian Kurz, there's been lots of criticism of the migration situation here in Europe, and in Germany, things were different. There was a left liberal government, and at the beginning it was said that everyone had to be accepted, but I think things have changed. Well, I think it's becoming clearer now than over the coming years we'll have more problems because, if I may say so, we have been talking about this problem not since 2015, but for a long time before that. And there are different reasons why people come to the European Union. And no one in the European Union or elsewhere would ever say that people who come from a situation of civil war or because they're being persecuted for whatever reason, that they should not be accepted in Europe. Of course they should be accepted, but they're only a fraction of the people who come here. And therefore, we need a system which helps us actually pick these people out of the masses and show them solidarity in Europe. Can I just interrupt you very briefly? I'm sorry, I have to be a little impolite, and but it's just that we have just been able to establish our line to Ukraine, and here we have the Vice Minister for European Affairs in Kiev.
Hello, colleagues. Yes, I can hear you.
Ich kann Sie gut hören. Frau
Ms. Stefanisha.
Now, at the moment in Kiev, I think it's your office, what is the situation? Can you tell us what's happening today?
Thank you so much. Greetings to everybody. Nicola, I was listening a bit to your messages, and I know that you're very well aware of the situation, and you're doing your best to help us. We had multiple contacts over the months since the beginning of war. So at this situation, on a daily basis, we receive reports following the outcomes and results of the massive airstrikes and shellings throughout the area of Ukraine. You know already that more than 30% of the electricity and other elements of the critical infrastructure has been destroyed. These targeted attacks are continued. It's already 3 or 4 times that Kiev and Kiev region has massively been subjected to airstrikes, while throughout all of the territory of Ukraine, from the west to the east and south, there's been a massive attacks with the drones and other types of more advanced types of the missiles to attack the elements of the critical infrastructure. This has resulted the massive disorder in the provision of the electricity and the water supplies to the population, which has become an extremely challenging task in the light of the beginning of the winter season. So, but the spirit of Ukrainian people is strong. We remain resilient. We have no other option but to survive this winter, to overcome. We know that our armed forces are fighting desperately to bring back our territory, to bring back the freedom and the rights to people who are now currently living under occupation. And we are not going to surrender under the attacks of any kind of missiles. But and we will restore all the infrastructure. We are grateful to Austria and other EU member states who have immediately switched into supporting with necessary assistance of Ukrainian energy infrastructure to be restored. We are doing it, and we will overcome this winter. And we send a very simple message to the Russian Federation that all the challenges and the crises and the suffering Ukraine has been facing these days, as well as European nations who are also subjected to nuclear and energy blackmail, we will overcome this winter, and we will overcome the aggressor. We will overcome the terror, and we will become stronger. So we understand that in this challenging time, we have no other option but to survive, and we're doing it with your support, and hope your support will become stronger, because we can restore everything, but we cannot only bring back the lives of our people who are dying on a daily basis following the missiles attack. So the only message I'm sending today is the message of the necessity to support Ukraine with air defense systems, which will enable to save the lives of our people. All the rest of it will be overcome, and we will become stronger together.
Mm-hmm. Minister Stefanisci, I hope you could hear the applause and the standing ovations for your statement here. I may give you a summary of what we talked about within the last 1.5 hours. Commissioner Hahn, who is responsible for the budget in the European Union, he said there will be more money for the Ukraine. Of course, we want to help. Of course, there is the perspective to join the European Union for the Ukraine. We also talked about that. Also, it will last many years for a full membership. But what can Europe, what can we do for you? Of course, we care for the refugees that came from the Ukraine to our countries. But what can we still do to help you, not only with the weapons, but also during the next month?
Thank you so much. I will put my answer in a bit of unexpected angle, I think. So two major elements. So on a fourth day of war, when Ukraine applied for membership into the European Union, we treated this application not only as the materialization of the spirit and the expectations of Ukrainian people. 91% of the Ukrainian population supports membership into European Union, but we also knew that in this time of the extreme challenges, we should invest into our unity, invest into strengthening our common values and the rules-based order. So we treated this application as an investment into European project as such. And we are extremely happy that on June 23rd, all 27 EU leaders have made a historical decision and suggested Ukraine to become a candidate country to membership in EU. This was an important step for Ukraine, but moreover, it has been a very important step for EU itself to show that there's no hesitation to the unity of the countries who are built on the same values, on the same rules. The long-lasting narrative of strategic ambiguity towards Russia, unwillingness to irritate Russian Federation with any kind of strong decisions and messages has not been in place. This decision has been taking place. So I think that a very strong investment with the recent decisions which has been done over June has been done into European project as such, to bring back European Union at the global arena as a major player and a key player in Europe generally. But these 8 months of war has already played a very serious role into making sure that we deter and we stand with the Russian aggression. And the recent meeting of European Council over the which lasted over the last 2 days, has been a very strong example of that. Just 2 weeks of the massive airstrikes and shellings of the territory of Ukraine has affected already a huge set of important decisions taken on this meeting of the leaders, which usually in the times before would have taken months or even years to agree. First, this is the sanctions against Iranian officials. This has strengthened and enhanced the military support of Ukraine by mobilizing another 500 million in the military support. This is, in fact, the decision which has never been taken in support of any EU member state, but now it's already 3 billion euros in supporting EU member states by providing the military assistance of Ukraine. And closing the sky would be possible because of this decision has already been taken and enforced. And of course, a huge package of assistance that we would essentially need on a monthly basis on the next year as a macro-financial assistance from EU, which has been will be combined with the support of the US partners. This decision has already also been taken. And this is essential to preserve the unity among people, between people and state, in making sure that the government and the governance in the country remains effective and efficient, that we are capable of ensuring our social functions as a state through deploying necessary payments through the budget to the people. So, and this is a word of huge gratitude also to Commissioner Hahn, him personally, for being the advocate of this support, which is vital for our survival of our people, for survival of our economy, and for making sure that we are able to withstand as long as it's needed until we overcome. So in that regard, a lot of decisions has been taken, but by the end of the day, I can confirm that it is a personal leadership of everybody in its place who had led us to make sure that Europe is standing with us and we're standing together for these values. This is such people as Commissioner Hahn, such people as Commissioner Johannes and Lenarčič, presidents of European Council, president of European Commission, and nearly all the EU leaders who has been personally committed to stand for the European project, to stand for Ukraine, and to make sure that democracy is not the best form or governance, but this is the best one for our people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stefanichina. One final question, maybe a critical one. In Austria, where we are just now, Austria raised its voice during the last European Summit, also for peace talks, for open peace talks, and it got a paragraph into the papers, into the final papers of this EU summit. Don't you think that an offensive towards a membership to the NATO, I think at the wall behind you I can see EU and NATO, an offensive membership in the NATO could maybe harm peace talks, make Putin even more aggressive?
This is exactly the message we all heard back in 2008 when there was a Bucharest summit and the Germany and France were operating with the same terms, saying that no membership to NATO could be granted to Ukraine and Georgia soon because it might irritate a Russian Federation. This has been the message, and this is by the fact the summit where Putin himself was participating and delivering the speech. The same year, Russia has invaded Georgia and annexed part of its territory. And in 2014, almost 7 years after this Bucharest summit, Russian Federation has accused Ukraine of being too proactive in European integration, which led to annexation of Crimea and occupation of Donbass. And without membership to NATO, without any message towards that, on 24th of February, Ukraine has been subjected to a full-scale, massive military attack, which is now lasting 48 months in Ukraine. So first, the message on strategic ambiguity towards Russia and unwillingness to irritate Putin is not the policy that has been working for the last 20 years. So we all now know a couple of very important elements. What Russia understands is she understands the language of those who have the power. And regardless the decision of Ukraine's membership to NATO, we should stand stronger and should not operate with the terms that we do not want it to irritate Russia. We should work on measures of active deterrence to make sure that every day we understand what we do so that we become stronger against Russian Federation, against threats, against terror. And here comes when we're talking about the peace negotiations. They will be taking place, definitely. But this is not a topic which could be derived from the elements related to responsibility, the tribunal, the accountability, the justice, the reparations. This is something which should be considered as a full picture. And of course, as you remember, even in the beginning of March, we had the negotiation groups to negotiate negotiate some agreement which would lead to the peaceful settlement of this war and withdrawal of Russian troops. This has, back in a time, been a period when we thought that this was just a war and we were relying on the rules of humanitarian law and the other elements related to the war. At the end of March, after the occupation of the Kiev and Chernihiv region, we saw the massive graves, massive murderies, a lot of evidence, dozens and dozens of evidence of multiple tortures, sexual and any other types of physical assault against people. And now, 6 months after the end of the war, from the deoccupation of the Kharkiv region, we see dozens and dozens times more information about something which has been happening in Kharkiv region. So now we have also massive attacks on our critical infrastructure, which is also targeted against Ukrainian people, not against Ukrainian authorities, not against, not part of the war theater. So it's very complicated, even I would say impossible, to operate in any terms related to the war and the rules. This is a terror and a genocide of Ukrainian people. So any negotiations should be based on the rules which would A, lead back to restoring Ukrainian territorial integrity, bringing justice towards those responsible for the crimes committed in Ukraine, orders given to commit these crimes, but also making sure that nothing in this peaceful discussion, peace talks and discussions would undermine the rules-based order, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole. And I think that the last one, and this last one, third element, is the one which should be of particular interest for the whole democratic world, because something which would might be agreed on a bilateral level between Ukraine and Russian Federation should not undermine anything which has been built for the last 75 years. Ukraine will not be in a position to make any kind of step like that, and I hope that the democratic countries will stand with us to make sure that we not only restore our territory and our independence, but also we will survive and preserve the peace in Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We are glad to see you that you're well. We cross our fingers. We will give you money, of course. We will help. And we care for the refugees of Ukrainian women and children that are here in Austria. Promise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ja, ein Interview, das, und das muss man sich immer vor Augen führen.
An interview which took place with someone not at the other end of the world, but just a few hundred kilometers from here. We should not forget that. Well, I met her repeatedly, I know her, and we see that she's outspoken, and they also have a clear understanding of what is needed nowadays. And I believe this has shown us very clearly once again the most diverse level of being concerned. This exists in Ukraine and exists here as well. Yes, we have to make sure that the impact of this aggression war by Putin upon our population is reduced. How will we heat during winter time? Is my job secure? How can I pay my food? This, of course, is very important for us, definitely yes, but the influence upon the people in Ukraine is so much stronger, so much more life-threatening, and courage and motivation and also working and living together, this we should have for all other crises as well. I think we have to stand together because we are fighting for a higher goal, for our freedom as well, for our state of law, for self-determination of people, because if that Putin model is imposed, then no border is secure any longer. Then it's again the power of the strongest, and this would definitely destroy everything which we have built up. And this, to bring this out more clearly in the international context, to say to people also in Africa and Asia that it's not a European issue. Ukraine does not just fight for some European answers, it's a question of the global order. Launsky-Tieffenthal, if we listen to what the Lady Minister has told us from Kharkiv region, for instance, it's personally a bit difficult to stay neutral, as Austria has always been and has always promised. I think that Austria, in this very concrete situation, as regards this war of aggression, also can definitely not act differently, and has shown clearly where we stand. I think that if there is neutrality from the Austrian perspective, it's limited to part of the military question, but definitely not can it be political or moral neutrality. I think Austria has shown very clearly that we definitely support all sanction packages as they have been agreed upon. Austria is very active, because this has been mentioned more and less, in questions of accountability, so supports the UN Convention in order to maybe also clear cases of possible war crimes, supports the International Criminal Court justice, and together with the Austrian public at large and the civil society has a major contribution. I believe all our countries endeavor to at least give to Ukrainians at least one heated room during wintertime, the so-called winterization program, which is the main intention nowadays of the Ukrainian side, so that people can survive the winter. So together with our partners in the Union, Austria stands by Ukraine very clearly. We have 10 minutes more, divided by 4 is 2.5 minutes each, maximum. So there is a final topic which we might address. This is the risk of nationalism and radicalism in Austria, because people, when losing their affluence and their well-being, are inclined to radicalize. We saw that last century as well. Yesterday you had presidential elections in Slovenia. There nothing happened at all. But what do we have to do as people loving democracy, finding democracy as the best possible art of governing in order to avoid radicalization? Because there are always some people who can't follow any longer and who are in a bad situation. Dear Secretary of State.
To Ukraine, because I would like to express really my full support to Ukrainian people, and it's unimaginable of what they're going through right now. I hope not many of you experienced war in your lifetime. I did 30 years ago. I experienced as a child 10 days of war in Slovenia, and I can tell you I still have nightmares from there. I mean, it's simply unimaginable to live through war for many months now. And we should not forget what they're facing. And I'm going to your question about radicalization at nationalisms. Ukraine is showing us what is important at the moment. At the moment, what is important is that we should be aware that living in a free and safe society is not something that just comes without anything. We actually have to fight for it. We did fight for it in the past in all of our countries. They're fighting for it in Ukraine right now. And once you gain it, then it should be sacred. Democracy, freedom, and solidarity between people should be something that should stay sacred. And that is why it's difficult to understand those tensions of nationalism and radicalization in Europe because it's not what we need right now. It's something opposite what we need. We need to be solidary with each other, and we need to try to build a better world where all of us will feel safer and can work together.
Wie ist die Situation in Nordmazedonien?
What is the situation in North Macedonia? Is there the risk of prices going up very much and living through a difficult winter and maybe a revival of anti-European forces? And what do you do against?
We already had it this summer when I think it was a very strong propaganda in the past several years, particularly starting with the Prespa agreement 4 years ago. Then we first had, let's say, anti-EU and anti-NATO protests, and many people were asking questions, are we paying a very high price for NATO membership? Maybe it's not proper to change the name of the country for NATO membership and for opening the accession negotiations with the EU. And that was a big populist wave. Today, 4 years later, when Finland and Sweden are asking for membership, and the Finnish Prime Minister came to Skopje to ask for support on this, everybody saw that it was important to get in, and that now in these turbulent moments we are a NATO ally, and strong countries, developed countries, democratic countries like Finland and Sweden are asking for membership. So the populism always loses on a long run, but it's difficult to survive. Last summer, or this summer actually, we had violent protests. The parliament was attacked, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was attacked. The Prime Minister, myself and the Foreign Minister were under strong personal attack because we negotiated with Bulgaria and with French presidency. But after all, I think we did the right thing. The case of Ukraine shows us that it's very simple. It's either the European democratic model or the tyranny of the Putin rule. And I think that if we learn the lessons from populists, where populists won, case of Brexit, case of, I wouldn't go farther, but everywhere where the populists won in the end, they faced very harsh consequences. And I think we should popularize this, that populism comes with harsh consequences. It's a daily fight in North Macedonia, but I can tell you the opening of the negotiations this summer and the assistance for energy crisis that we're getting now, and the development of the positive atmosphere and high-level visits of EU officials to North Macedonia, President von der Leyen is coming in Wednesday, will change the atmosphere and will beat the nationalists and populists at the end, because they don't have any policy then only disturbing. I will just mention the President von der Leyen was speaking in the parliament, in our parliament, under very high tensions. For the first time, we have 2 anti-NATO and anti-EU MPs coming from a pro-Russian party, and we need the next elections to be 0, not 5 or 7. So we are together in this fight, and I think it's pan-European fight. Let's stay together in it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Peter Launsky-Tieffenthal, auch bei uns hat es eine Radikalisierung gegeben. Schon
Tieffenthal, we had radicalization even regarding COVID. There were some demonstrations, partly not peaceful, and now some say that the Russia sanctions have to be abandoned. We have to negotiate more. There is a slightly radicalized mood now also in the political Austria. What about your trouble? A cold winter, difficulties during winter, higher unemployment. Might this become radicalization? First, I believe it's important to say that the possibility of free opinion is a very high achievement and value, and so of course there can be demonstrations, always but peaceful. And it has been said here repeatedly, obviously we are not only in a military conflict but also in a conflict which regards the narrative of what is actually the root cause of all these problems we are faced with. And recently at a visit to South Africa, we spoke to the colleagues there, and they show a clear understanding for our position as regards the question of sovereignty and territorial integrity. They themselves are very sensitive to this, and they understand our European reactions. And at the same time, they also believe a bit of the Russian narrative that the sanctions are the root cause and not the aggression before. And it is so important that we tell the people even more clearly, yes, it's about Ukraine, yes, it's about people in Ukraine, but it's also about our model of living. And if we can't find a better narrative, if we can't tell the story better, then we will fail when dealing with maybe more radical forces. Dear Vice President, the question also to you. In Germany, AfD is getting strong, and on the European level, Italy, much more rightist now, Fratelli d'Italia in Sweden, a government which depends on the right radical Swedish Democrats. So is there not a worry that there could be radicalization all over Europe? Yes, of course, this is important for all of us, because we see that there is now rightist and leftist populism. If you add Cinque Stelle in Italy, you then also have the reasons of the forces of reason which are in a minority. Macron has just avoided it by a pinch. Otherwise, Mélenchon and Le Pen would have had more votes together than the forces of the center. So yes, this has to keep us busy and have to give us headache. And of course, different societies are different models of living. And if this appeasement with Putin is followed, this is maybe kind of a satellite state which is generated, which will always depend on aggressors and despots and autocrats. On the other hand, we should also lead this discussion and bring out more clearly why the price I pay for my power, for my heating, has something to do with the fact that the European Union acts together, for instance, in gas purchase. Why this question whether jobs are protected, whether I can lead my private life as I wanted to. Democracies like Taiwan should, for instance, be maintained, and China should not just block trade lines, and our semiconductor imports would just be cut away. So these are questions which seem to be abstract on a macro level, like peace, freedom and international order. This has a very direct impact upon all our private lives. And as a European Union, we are definitely the best model in order to face and fight this. And I think from the interview now with the Vice Head of Ukraine, we have fully understood that the challenge for the people in Ukraine, being threatened, being shelled and so on, is something completely different. So altogether, we should certainly also try to do what we can do. Thanks. This has been very nice closing words, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Maybe I have just one request. Maybe this discussion has also contributed to this very topic, radicalization. So my call upon the young people being here: Europe is more than just using Interrail, no borders, a common currency, and also the charger for the mobiles. This is excellent, but Europe is much more. Europe is our basis of common values, is our freedom, is our peace. And whenever we speak to the young people, I think Europe is not the problem, Europe is the solution. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening and watching. Now we have a short break until the next block. Thank you.